Welcome to part 8 of Buddhism. In this part, we're going to be discussing Mahayana, one of the main types of Buddhism. This one is prevalent in East Asia. So Mahayana means great vehicle in Sanskrit. What is distinctive about Mahayana Buddhism is teaching the Bodhisattva Path. The ideal in Mahayana Buddhism is to become a full Buddha, a complete Buddha, a Samyak Sambuddha in your own right, not just an Arhat. So an Arhat is a being who follows in the footsteps of a Buddha, follows the teaching or Dharma laid out by a Buddha who has come before. A Bodhisattva is someone who deliberately puts off their awakening. They're a very advanced spiritual being. They could become awakened sooner rather than later, but they choose to delay their awakening, to be reborn in samsara until such a time that they can be reborn at a time and a place where the Dharma has been lost or forgotten. And then they will reintroduce the Dharma and become a complete Buddha in their own right. This is regarded as a nobler or superior path in Mahayana Buddhism, rather than becoming an Arhat, because you are helping out countless other beings in that world attain awakening in their own right. So Mahayana Buddhism also teaches that lay people can become enlightened or awakened. Awakening is quite rare. That's the usual Buddhist view. This is something that Theravada Buddhism has in common with Mahayana Buddhism, the rarity of awakening. Indeed, some Buddhists would tell you that it's no longer possible because the Dharma has fallen into decline. Nevertheless, at least in principle, in Mahayana Buddhism, a person living the life of a layperson could become a awakened being if they develop their virtue and their wisdom, similar to how a monk would. Mahayana Buddhism looks down upon Theravada and calls it Hinayana, which means lesser vehicle. They actually view Theravada as including simpler or less profound teachings that the Buddha gave. This is the notion of a provisional teaching. The Pali Canon is the main collection of sacred texts used in Theravada Buddhism. Mahayana acknowledges that the Pali Canon is an authentic teaching of the Buddha, but they regard it as a simpler teaching for lesser beings, those who are only capable of becoming Arhants at the most, as opposed to becoming complete Buddhas. The Mahayana have their own set of texts that they add to the original canon, and they call this the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Those are the earliest forms of the Mahayana Sutras. They teach a different, basically, philosophy or metaphysics of being called emptiness than what you will find in the Pali Canon. Emptiness does exist as a concept in the Pali Canon, but it's not used as an interpretation of the fundamental nature of reality, as it is in the Mahayana Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. Even though Mahayana Buddhists do not use the Pali Canon per se, they use Chinese or other translations of ancient Sanskrit texts that are quite close in their content to the Pali Sutras. However, they are adding their additional Mahayana Sutras as well, such as the Perfection of Wisdom ones. In Mahayana Buddhism, it's common to worship not only Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical founder of Buddhism, but other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas as well. The picture on the right is of Avalokiteshvara, a Bodhisattva that's worshipped in Mahayana Buddhism. Avalokiteshvara is regarded as the Bodhisattva of compassion. That's why he has all of these hands that he can extend to help out other beings. There's a belief in Mahayana Buddhism that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas will respond to prayers. In Theravada Buddhism, they do pray to the Buddha and sometimes expect blessings in return. But according to the official doctrine of the religion, the Buddha and other awakened beings have transcended samsara, so they will not remanifest or be reborn in samsara after they attain parinirvana. However, in Mahayana Buddhism, the teaching is that a Buddha or Bodhisattva can actually emerge in samsara, manifest whenever they want to. Even a complete Buddha can do that after they've left their last body. And so that's part of the kind of motivation behind praying to a Buddha or Bodhisattva, is the expectation they may actually hear your prayer and respond. There is a concept of merit transfer in Mahayana Buddhism. This does exist in Theravada Buddhism as well. The notion is that you can, out of an abundance of compassion or goodwill to other beings, share the merit or the good karma that you've accumulated. You can kind of try to share it out among them. However, in Mahayana Buddhism, this takes the form specifically of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who are godlike beings, who have vast, essentially infinite stores of merit because of their high degree of moral perfection and wisdom. They can share out their good karma to other beings. This is a modification of the original teaching of Buddhism, which seemed to focus more on an individual's karma. The Buddha seemed to have taught that you can only, in a sense, save yourself by your own actions. The Buddha or other beings cannot directly save you. You have to save yourself, but by following the teaching of a Buddha. However, in Mahayana Buddhism, they believe that you can essentially get good karma or the blessings of the good karma of other beings by prayer. The Bodhisattva Path is the path of Mahayana Buddhism. This is when you aspire to become a complete Buddha in the far future. Instead of trying to become an arhat, instead of trying to attain your own awakening as soon as possible. And the idea is that if you delay your awakening and get reborn until you can be reborn in a world where there's no Dharma, then you could, like the original Buddha himself, Shakyamuni Buddha, can teach the Dharma to that whole universe. And Shakyamuni Buddha is in fact not regarded as the very first Buddha. The belief in Buddhism seems to be that there's always been the Dharma. There's always been a teaching on how to escape samsara. Samsara has no discernible beginning, but neither does the Dharma. And so if you go back in time, there were other Buddhas in previous eras. And also they believe in other universes or other world systems that could have their own Buddhas as well. And the image on the right actually shows you the Buddha in a previous life where he was just a bodhisattva. So this is talking about Siddhartha Gautama or Shakyamuni Buddha. When he first learned about the Dharma, it was from another Buddha. The previous Buddha was named Dipankara Buddha. And you can see the bodhisattva at the basically bowing, showing his respects to Dipankara Buddha. And he resolves to perform a similar role to be a Buddha himself in a future lifetime. So when you take a vow or a resolution to become a complete Buddha in a future life, this is known as the Bodhisattva vow. And taking on the Bodhisattva vow is basically what's distinctive to Mahayana Buddhism. This vow basically involves practicing what are called paramitas or perfections. The belief is that in order to become a complete Buddha, you do have to have some skills and some powers and a very high level of virtue and wisdom that may in some sense be even more than what an arhat has. And so you practice these perfections over many lifetimes, then you can be reborn to become a full Buddha yourself later on. I will note in passing that this image of the Bodhisattva and Dipankara Buddha was from one of the Indo-Greek kingdoms. Actually, I believe it was from Gandhara in northwest India. And you can see that there was a Greek influence on the iconography. This is because the rulers of those kingdoms were Greek-speaking, and they had ethnically Greek sculptors do some of their religious imagery for them. So let's talk more about Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and their role in Mahayana Buddhism. There's a belief by all Buddhists that the next Buddha will come after Shakyamuni Buddha's Dharma has fallen into decline. The next Buddha is already named. He's Maitreya Buddha. And this is something that's talked about in the Pali Canon as well as other texts. So Theravada Buddhists as well as Mahayana Buddhists believe in Maitreya. Maitreya, his name comes from a Sanskrit word Maitri, which means friendliness or loving kindness or having goodwill for other beings. So he's also called the friendly one. The notion is that he's the friend of humanity and other beings, and that's why he's going to restore the Dharma after it has declined. You can see an image of Maitreya Buddha on the right, and he's actually being portrayed in a heavenly realm called the Tushita heaven. In Buddhism, there are many different heavenly realms, and there's different classes of gods in the different heavens. And the different heavens can be characterized by different states of being and states of mind as well. But the Maitreya Buddha is basically incarnated in the Tushita heaven, so he's still technically in samsara, and his next incarnation will be his last, when he comes down to our world, the human realm, and restores the Dharma. By the way, there are kind of different interpretations or different versions of what restoring the Dharma can look like. So sometimes this could involve the Dharma being completely lost or forgotten, like no one even knows who the Buddha is or what Buddhism or the Dharma is, and then you have a new Buddha come to restore it. But there are also versions of this that say, well, technically the Dharma could be remembered, but it's no longer understood because it's been so long since the Buddha taught it. People can no longer use it to actually become awakened. And so that would be another reason why the Dharma has to be reintroduced by Maitreya or another Buddha. So some other important Buddhas and Bodhisattvas in Mahayana Buddhism include Manjushri, Avalokiteshvara, and Amitabha. Manjushri is the Bodhisattva of wisdom. Avalokiteshvara is the Bodhisattva of compassion. And you can see that many of these Bodhisattvas are named after or associated with moral or other spiritual virtues. So Avalokiteshvara is the kind of embodiment of the perfection of compassion, just as Manjushri is the embodiment of the perfection of wisdom. Amitabha is another Buddha who's predominant in Mahayana Buddhism. He's a Buddha who rules in a pure land, another realm that he created, where he teaches the Dharma to beings that have been reborn there. A Buddha realm is a whole world that's created by a Buddha for the benefit of beings in samsara. There's a notion in Mahayana that Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are godlike beings that can create their own worlds if they think it will help them teach the Dharma. Amitabha Buddha specifically is often prayed to by Mahayana Buddhists who believe that if they pray to him, they can be reborn in their next life in the Pure Land. And from there, it will be easier for them to attain nirvana because they'll be able to hear the Dharma directly from Amitabha Buddha. There's another important concept in Mahayana Buddhism called skillful means. This is a translation of the Sanskrit phrase upaya kusala. Upaya means means or method, and kusala means skillful. The teaching of skillful means is that the Buddha gave different dharmas or different teachings to different beings, and they were targeted to beings of greater or lesser understanding. So why would he do this? Well, there's a Mahayana sutra called the Lotus Sutra that explains the rationale for these different teachings using a metaphor, a parable. In this parable, there's a burning house, which you can see in the picture on the right. And there's a father outside the house, and his son is inside the house. And the son, the child, doesn't realize the danger he's in, and doesn't realize that by leaving the house, he can go to safety. The house is burning, and it's no longer possible for the father to go in and rescue the child. So in order to get the child out of the house, the father basically tells a kind of story that's not true. He says that I have a toy chariot for you waiting outside, so you should come out here and get the toy chariot. The father makes up the toy chariot. It doesn't exist, but it's for the skillful purpose of getting the child out of the house to safety. Fire is often used as a metaphor for samsara, the suffering of samsara in Buddhism. Now, the idea is that the Buddha is like the Father by saying something that's not completely true in order to benefit the beings who hear the teaching. The people of lesser understanding are like the child who don't understand the danger that they're in and would not do anything and would continue to suffer unless they were taught this sort of half-truth or not literal truth by the Buddha. So the Pali Canon, or the other parts of the Chinese or other Mahayana scriptures that correspond to the Pali Canon, these are regarded as provisional teachings in Mahayana Buddhism. They're not the final truth. They're not the ultimate teaching of a Buddha. And they have a kind of more simplistic understanding of reality. This is also connected to the notion that the Pali Canon teaches becoming an arhat as a worthy goal whereas in the Mahayana Sutras, they're teaching a more profound goal of becoming a full Buddha yourself. This notion that the Pali Canon contains only a partial, a provisional teaching is also cashed out in terms of this philosophical distinction between conventional and ultimate reality. Mahayana Buddhists will say that the Pali Canon and the other similar corresponding texts in the Mahayana Sutras contain only a conventional truth. They're the kind of superficial layer of reality, whereas the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, those are the ones that are distinctively Mahayana. They contain the ultimate, the deeper, more profound truth. Another important doctrine of Mahayana Buddhism that's not present in Theravada, it's called trickayah, or the three bodies of a Buddha. So these are the Dharma body, the bliss body, and the form body. I'm illustrating these by Vajrayana images, but we'll get to Vajrayana Buddhism later. Vajrayana Buddhism is the type of Buddhism that uses the sexual embrace imagery, which you can see here. This imagery is not used by all Mahayana Buddhists, but this image of the three bodies is just a convenient way of remembering the trickayah doctrine that is taught by Mahayana Buddhists. I will start with the form body because it's the most obvious or commonsensical one. The form body of a Buddha is just how they manifest in a physical body or in some other body that maybe is not made of ordinary matter, but is still visible or otherwise perceptible to beings. Now, the teaching of Mahayana Buddhism is that a Buddha is a cosmic being, in a sense, that can manifest form bodies at will. And so a Buddha can be manifest in different images in different worlds at the same time. And they can do this even after they've attained parinirvana. The bliss body corresponds to the inner form of a Buddha, you might say, what it's like to be in the mind of a Buddha, the qualitative experience. So this could include feelings like joy, happiness, or bliss. That's why it's called the bliss body. The bliss body is associated not with what we can see with our external senses, sight, sound, touch, taste, smell, but rather with our inner experience, specifically with the pure states of being, the dhyanas, that we can attain through meditation. The belief is that a Buddha can manifest on those levels as well, these blissful, calm, concentrated states of being. And so in a sense, we can metaphorically see or encounter the bliss body of a Buddha in meditation. The Dharma body is the most abstract. It's the one that's not perceptible either externally or internally. It corresponds to the timeless wisdom of the Buddha and his teaching. It also corresponds to these more abstract realms of being that you can attain after the fourth dhyana. Those are the Brahma Viharas, or the divine realms of infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception nor non-perception. The idea is the innermost nature of a Buddha, the Dharma body, is this kind of timeless wisdom that can't even be specifically characterized by emotional or mental experience, much less physical. And the belief of Mahayana Buddhism is that the Buddha actually exists on all three of these levels at the same time. Mahayana Buddhism contains different schools of thought within it. So the earliest is known as Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka school taught the perfection of wisdom, or prajna paramita. Prajna is a Sanskrit word that means wisdom. Paramita means perfection. And the belief is that only the Mahayana Perfection of Wisdom Sutras contain the deeper truths you need to understand in order to become a Buddha by following the Bodhisattva Path. The teaching specifically of the Madhyamaka school is shunyata, or emptiness. Now, this is something common to all Mahayana Buddhists, the doctrine of emptiness, but Madhyamaka was the first to give a systematic philosophical account of it. So Madhyamaka is both a school of thought or a philosophy, as well as a branch of Mahayana Buddhism, the religion. Shunyata means emptiness, and in Mahayana Buddhism, emptiness means the fundamental nature of reality, lacks inherent existence. What they mean by this is that things are real, they exist in a way, but it's a kind of partial and interconnected existence. Everything is connected with every other thing. So one object, such as the bed you lie on at night, or the car that you drive to work or school, these things are all causally interconnected with each other and with you. And actually, you are causally interconnected with other beings with karma. So shunyata both means that things lack inherent existence in their own right because they're collections of causal factors. Like your body, for example, is a collection of parts that are causally interrelated. But also there's not an interconnectedness aspect of this too, that what you experience is a product of your own choices, but your choices affect the experience of other beings and vice versa. And if you look at reality from this perspective of interconnectedness or of many layers of being, and what we call the self is, or what we call an object is just the outer layer, and there's deeper layers, and there's basically no bottom. That's the idea of shunyata. So by analogy, it would be as if we looked inside a cell of your body and found molecules. We looked inside the molecules and found atoms. We looked inside the atoms and found subatomic particles like electrons and protons. We looked inside those and found quarks. We're going to smaller and smaller levels, but according to emptiness, there's no bottom. And then the other aspect of emptiness is that all of those parts and all the different levels are causally affecting each other. And so even though they didn't use the modern scientific theory of atoms or subatomic particles, they had a kind of similar way of deconstructing reality in ancient Mahayana Buddhism. The Madhyamaka school is named after Madhyamaka, which means middle way in Sanskrit. The founder of the school, Nagarjuna, was using the term middle way to refer to his philosophical doctrine. He's presenting emptiness as a statement of the way things are, a metaphysical theory about the nature of reality that's midway between what he calls eternalism and annihilationism. Now, the Buddha had used the term eternalism and annihilationism to refer to opposing theories of the self that he rejected. Eternalism was the belief in an eternal or fixed self that's unchanging over time, like a soul. Annihilationism is the view that the self or the sentient being does not exist at all. It's just an arbitrary collection of parts, or that it does exist, but it comes to an absolute end at the death of the body. So the Buddha rejected both of those extreme views of the self. However, Nagarjuna is interpreting these concepts in a broader way. So eternalism is the view that there's any being at all that's a fixed substance with determinate properties. And annihilationism would be the extreme view that nothing exists or is real in any right. So emptiness, because the word suggests nothingness, it's easy to confuse with annihilationism. But emptiness is not saying that things are empty of all reality. It's saying that things that we experience, like your body, or the chair you're sitting in, or the bike you ride to work, are empty of fixed or inherent existence because they're all of these causally interdependent parts. And obviously this gets into very deep philosophy very quickly. And this is the sort of thing that's characteristic of many different Buddhist schools. They each have their own Abhidharma or philosophical teachings, their own philosophical interpretation of the teachings of the Buddha. The Madhyamaka school traveled to other parts of Asia as well. So Nagarjuna was from India, but the teachings of the school traveled to China via the Central Asian monk named Kumarajiva. And in China, it's known as Sanlun, or the Three Treatises School, because of three early texts that explain the teachings of Madhyamaka. You'll notice in the image on the right that Nagarjuna is shown on a raft in an ocean, and he has serpents above his head, and there's another human-headed serpent being that's giving him a text at the bottom. The rectangular object that he has in his hand, as well as that of the serpent being, is a palm leaf manuscript. So it would be like a book or a scripture of Buddhism. So to unpack this imagery a little bit, the serpents around his head may look familiar to you. It's the same type of Naga imagery we see in Hinduism. So this is an illustration of the idea that the Shesha, or another king of the Nagas, is serving as the protector of Nagarjuna. This is a way of expressing visually the notion that he is an awakened being worthy of reverence or protection. And then the Naga, or the serpent being at his feet that's giving him the text, this expresses a teaching of Mahayana Buddhism that the Mahayana Sutras were not shared by the Buddha openly during his life. Instead, they were written down and stored beneath the world and protected by Nagas until they could be revealed to scholars and bodhisattvas or saints that could understand their significance and teach them to others. This is how in Mahayana Buddhism they explain why their sutras are from the Buddha, but not something that was widely known or circulated in his lifetime or in the first few centuries thereafter. You'll also notice that in this image of Nagarjuna, he's on an ocean. This is similar to icons in Hinduism showing gods on the primeval ocean. It basically is symbolizing the bliss and eternity of awakening or nirvana. Another school of Mahayana philosophy is called Yogacara. This means yoga practice. In this context, yoga means a meditation practice. They were a Mahayana school focusing on perfecting and training the mind through meditation. They also had a philosophical interpretation of the mind called consciousness only. This is the view that the objects of consciousness, the various things you're perceiving with the senses, for example, don't have an independent existence outside of your consciousness. So they would say that there's a way in which your body is real and the earth is real, but it only exists in the experience of yourself and other conscious beings. This is known as philosophical idealism in Western philosophy, the notion that the mind or the ideas and experiences in the mind are the fundamental reality, not matter or physical reality. Yogacara is also known for a teaching called store consciousness. This is that your actions or karma contain seeds that are stored into a kind of hidden or more distant part of your mind. And they remain there until they ripen to fruit later on in your existence. So because Yogacara teaches consciousness only doctrine, they have to have some way of explaining how it is that your karma has a causal effect on your later consciousness. And they point to this kind of aspect of your mind that you're not usually aware of. You could think of it as similar to the idea of the unconscious mind in Western psychology. That's the store consciousness where those seeds remain until they ripen into fruit in later experience. For example, if you harm or murder someone, that's like planting a seed in your mind that could bear fruit in your next life, where you may be tormented in a hell realm or suffer some other painful, torturous experience as a result of that past karma, planting the seed. In Yogacara, they use the term tatata, which means thusness or suchness. Tata basically means like this or like that, and it's a vague way of talking about the nature of emptiness, or what it's like to experience the truth of emptiness as an awakened being. So all of the Mahayana schools of thought accept the doctrine of emptiness, but they may have different ways of explaining it or relating it to the rest of their philosophy. So the phrase suchness or thusness became very common in Mahayana Buddhism. The idea is that the reality of emptiness and what it means can be experienced directly by the mind, by an awakened mind, but it cannot be put fully into words. The belief is that our words are only a reflection of conventional reality, and so they will at most express this superficial understanding of things, not their inner nature. Our words tend to express an eternalist view of things, in which if we refer to a body or to a chariot or to a mountain, it implies we're talking about a fixed being with a fixed nature at one point in time, and that persists over time. So it's essentially unified at one point of time, and it has a constant nature that persists. Like your body might be thought of as one thing now, and as the same thing in different moments of time. But Mahayana teaches that's basically an illusion. that the body is a collection of parts that are always changing, and that ever-changing and causally interdependent nature is what emptiness means. Now, this can be somewhat described verbally, but the teaching of suchness is that you cannot fully comprehend this unless you just experience it directly by training your mind through meditation. So the Yogacara school was founded by two brothers or half-brothers, Asanga and Vasubandhu. And this is the early generation of these Mahayana scholars in India, when Buddhism was still widely practiced in India. Eventually it would die out, but not before the main schools of Mahayana Buddhism were established. In China and East Asian Buddhism, there is Yogacara. In Chinese, it's known as Fa Xiang, which translates to Dharma character. And the Chinese version of Yogacara was founded by the Chinese monk Xuanzang. According to the tradition, he traveled to India to learn more about Buddhist teachings, and he brought back the Yogacara school to China. A mythical or legendary version of his travel to India is known as Journey to the West. It's basically one of the main novels or works of literature from Chinese culture, and it's still very popular and widely known today.